где проживает очень много людей, правильно и устойчиво организовать транспорт. Сегодня у нас Роберт Равелли, президент компании Contemporary Solutions, и человек, который занимался транспортным планированием города Филадельфии с 1996 по 2003 год. И вот пока мы окончательно здесь настраиваем проектор и презентацию, мистер Равелли попросил узнать, какой бэкграунд профессиональной аудитории. Могли бы поднять руки те, кто профессиональный планировщик, транспортник, архитектор или еще кто-то? Не так много. А все остальные, я так понимаю, просто интересующиеся, так сказать, вопросами урбанистики, да, люди. Да, я, конечно, забыл сказать, что у нас лекторий организован при поддержке компании Asphalt. Собственно, без него вся серия наших лекторий не состоялась бы. А теперь передаю слово мистеру Равелли.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sorry that I'm late coming here, but I got lost here in Moscow, coming from the Higher School of Economics, where I just gave a lecture to the urban planning students there, and had a technological failure. My mobile stopped working because it lost its charge while I was walking with it, giving me my directions. So then I tried to use my laptop to give me directions. The laptop wouldn't work because it was too cold. So I was looking around trying to find out where I was, and luckily I turned a corner and Apple was standing there, and I was concerned I was going to miss the whole lecture because I couldn't use my computer or my phone. But here I am now, and I'm very glad to be here. As Pavel said, I am from Philadelphia in the U.S., but I currently work in London, where I spend my time doing consulting in urban planning, and in particular transport planning and integrating land use and transport. I understand a little bit about the organization here, but I appreciate you taking time this evening to come and listen to what I have to say. I've worked in various places around the world, in Australia, in China, in the European Commission Union area, Britain, London, and in the US. And there are a lot of common themes that you can find in all of these places, and that involve creating more sustainable urban places. So what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is sustainable transport planning, and how we can create places that are great places to live and work, and also help our environment as well. I understand some of you speak or understand English, and others are having interpreting. Hope I will not be speaking too quickly for you. I've given Pavel the outline of my presentation, so some of that the interpreters will be able to see the images and they'll be able to read what I'm putting up there. So if I'm speaking too quickly, I hope you will understand. So what I'm going to talk about, this is a lecture that I gave at the Higher School of Economics last night. I've been to Moscow actually 6 times. This is my 6th visit to Moscow. I have spent, my first visit was in 2011, and I must say there's been a lot of positive changes in Moscow that I've seen, given this, what I see here along Kuznetsky Most is an improvement with the pedestrianization, the improved pedestrian amenity. And I've had a chance to see how some of the positive things are going on here in Moscow. I was working on a project with the Moscow Metro on a station about 20 kilometers from here, and I'll show you some of that at the end of this presentation as well. So what I'm going to talk to you about is what is sustainable transport planning? What is transit-oriented development, which is an American term, which means developing around transport hubs, and how we create mixed-use places for people to live and work. I will show you a few examples. And I will talk a little bit about the future and how can we make changes to the way we live in cities. So what do we mean by sustainable transport planning? It really means creating, transport and urban planning, particularly transport planning, is always thought about how do we get people from one place to another. And many times it's just an engineering project, a new train, a new tram, a new highway. And instead of thinking about it as just getting someone from here to there, we have to think about what does this actually mean to our community? What does that transport project mean to the people who live around that particular transport area? How is it impacting the climate, the environment? How is it improving the efficient movement of people? Is it providing a quality of urban environment? So we're not just talking about an engineering project where someone goes from this place to that place, but we're talking about looking at the city as a whole place and how we can make our whole urban environment responsive to transport access. So we allow people choices of how they get to where they need to be. And maybe in the process, we're reducing emissions, we're reducing use of fossil fuels, we're creating better healthy city by giving people more ways to get to where they need to be without having to drive all the time. So that's what we mean by sustainable transport planning, and you can mention some of those those of you who don't read English. So when we think about the problems of having a dependent, we've grown up in the last 50 years with cities all around the world where we emphasized all development around the car, and even in Europe and in Britain, in London, even in British cities, but certainly in America, we developed our cities with the car as the main transport mode, and to the detriment of other modes and other quality of life. Walking became difficult, cycling became sometimes impossible, and we have, just depending on the car for everything, has a social and an environmental cost. Certainly the environmental are fairly obvious, but even the economic costs, building new roads, losing valuable farmland or open spaces, cost of building all new infrastructure to places that really aren't very well served by other, very low density, and are not very well served by other modes of travel. And there are social issues. If you are living in a community that's only accessible by car, and you may not have access to a car, you can feel isolated, and you can feel as if your social networks are being affected. So when we think about transportation, we need to think about it. This is the key point. This is the key point, which is transport is not about getting from here to there. It's about providing connections between communities and within communities through integrating land use and planning land use policies that create choices of mode of travel. So when we think about in history, cities before the car came around were built very compact, very small. You walked everywhere. Even here in Russia, the cities were walled, had a wall around them. because you just walked, you didn't have any choice. So they were very compact. When the car came along, but I'll show you what happened in America, we have this, which is single-family homes spread out as far as you can see, a garage, a driveway, and every house. Roads that are very indirect. And you have to drive everywhere, to the shopping mall, to the school, to the church, to the health facility, to anything. This is in Southern California, actually. So this is what we have to deal with in terms of how we as planners and urbanists build cities where we have to add more population, so we get away from this pattern of land use. And you can see this in the highway. Think about how much land highways take up. This is an example. This is a highway interchange in the USA. You take that same amount of land that interchange takes up. This is Salzburg, Austria. That is the entire city center of Salzburg covered in an interchange. So you get a sense of how big and invasive freeways are on a city and on a community. And unfortunately, over the last 50 years, we have been building freeways without thinking about their impacts on people who live near them and those who may have been removed because of them. So we have to think differently. And fortunately, in most cities in the world today, this type of solution to transport is no longer an option. And now we're thinking multimodal, where we have to provide for all types of travel: cycling, walking, trains, trams, buses, sharing cars, taxis, things like Uber, that sort of thing. So we have to create a multi-transit mode type of place. And this is what you have here in Moscow. This is the problem we have here. We have too many cars and not enough streets. So this is not an acceptable way to live. It's not an acceptable way to travel. You know where this is? I don't know where this is. I took this photo out of a book. You know what street this is? I don't know. You know? The garden ring. Well, there's no garden in this ring. The gardens are long gone. What we need is more gardens, right? We need to bring the gardens back. This is not the way we want to be living in the 21st century. I mean, to walk across this, I had to go down into an underground passageway, right, to come up the other side. If I'm a pedestrian, it's crazy. This is just not sustainable. Not to mention the cost in terms of air pollution, the wasting of fuel. It's just, we have to come up with other ways of managing our urban environment. And things like this. Now, luckily here in Moscow, this used to be the case. This was taken in Moscow a few years ago, but now they've adopted new parking regulations, and so you don't see this anymore. But there are still cities. I was in Bucharest, Romania, back in June, and they're still doing this. They have no restrictions on parking in the city, and cars are parking on the sidewalks and everywhere. And if you're a pedestrian, you feel like, oh my God, you have to walk in the street. It's very, very difficult. And in America, it's the same problem. This is a street, a main highway. There's no sidewalk. There's no bus shelter. It's really, you wouldn't want to walk along there. You might get killed by a car. And all these signs and utility poles. It's very unfriendly. And we have a situation in America, and this happens in other countries too, where you have suburban patterns of development, where we might have had a big store like this, a big department store, this huge parking lot, and now the store is closed. So what are we going to do with this big parking lot? It's this huge amount of space, all covered in asphalt, and it's useless now. So how do we redevelop that? How do we bring that back to something more useful is a real challenge. Now the European Commission is concerned about this problem as well. And the European Union has now adopted a whole series of, there's a whole new culture of creating more urban mobility, multimodal urban mobility. And now in the European Union countries, many of the communities are now required to create a sustainable urban mobility plan, which means their plan has to integrate transport and land use, and they have to think sustainable integration, so that we can avoid having these kind of land use patterns that I showed. This is an example in England. Prince Charles, who is very active in environmental issues, owns a lot of land here, and he is building a whole new town based on the principles of new urbanism, which is building a whole new town, making it look like a medieval town with walkable streets, clusters of land use. Now there are people who have cars that live here, and they do drive, but they don't have to have a car, and they don't have to drive, so everything is clustered around walkable spaces. So when we think of sustainable transport choices, these are the things we think about. How do we reduce the length of the journey? Maybe reduce the need to travel at all. Reducing traffic volumes, but also promoting healthy lifestyles. I won't go into all this, but when we think about planning new places or redeveloping places, we have to think about what kind of land use would help support public transport, walking and cycling, as opposed to cars. So we don't want to be building what I showed you in that other photo, the big parking lot. We don't want to have a lot of car dealers. We don't want to have some giant, big, single-use building like a warehouse or that has no active uses. We want to have things like this. We want to have things where people can go and do and be active. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the transport land use relationship. Now I'll talk to you a little bit about this concept, which in America we call transit-oriented development. And this is the definition here. But what we're talking about, in other countries they use different names for it, but it basically means creating a mixed-use activity center around the transport hub. And there's so many stations, even here in Moscow, where the land around it is very underutilized. Interestingly, the Moscow Suburban Railway Company is doing plans around some of its stations in suburban Moscow, in the Moscow, what do you call it, the Moscow Oblast? Yeah, outside the city, where the stations are, their system. And they have been taking a look at several stations, on maybe about 50 stations, and doing an analysis of how these stations are going to be redeveloped with the land around them, so they can create these kinds of places. So the 4 Ds of what makes these kinds of developments successful is, 1, the distance from the transit hub. They have to be close. The density of the development has to be more dense than single-family homes. It has to have a mix of uses, and it has to be well designed. And that's very, very important, so people want to be there and live and work there. So these are the kind of things that you'll find in a transport hub. And these are the kind of places that you'll find. You might have a bus rail interchange with great cycle lanes. You might have, there's a station, this is in Australia, there's a station underneath the street here. And then the houses are built above the shops, just like in former times in cities in the past before cars. So that way people can work and live near where everything's located. This is a place where they provide some bicycle parking. In this case, the station area above it was developed so that they provided a real estate benefit above the station instead of underneath it. But I've been talking a lot today, so pardon me, I'm going to take a bit of a break. This kind of development has a benefit to both the public sector and the private sector. So to the public sector, it means things like more revenues for the transport provider. That's why the Moscow Suburban Railway was interested in this idea, because they see it as a way to get more people to take their trains. They see the stationary development as a way to attract more riders to the station and use their facilities, and also make some money from the development of the station. There's increased housing opportunities around these stations. In London, the Transport for London is taking an inventory of many of their stations in the London Underground and the Overground, and looking at some of the land that they own that they can use for affordable housing development. And it increases tax revenues, and it conserves open space. So the public sector benefits from these kind of developments. But the private sector also benefits because there's increased value of the land around those stations that those private sector owners can then develop property for real estate. If you were a business and you're located in one of these hubs, you will have greater access to your employees who might want to come to your office because the transport is there. And in terms of providing better health benefits, if more people are physically active rather than sitting in a car all day, then improves their health. And as I was mentioning, the impact on property values, this is in America and in London. But as you can see by these figures, the increases of, the closer you are to public transport, the more valuable your land is. And in London right now, the Crossrail project, which is being built at the moment, people who live along the line are seeing their house prices going up because they now are closer to public. They will be now closer to public transport, so their apartments are worth more, and because they're going to have greater access. I'm going to show you two little animations, which will give you an idea of what these concepts are like in reality. Now this is a street in the U.S., and this could be a street in Moscow, really, or in Russia. I mean it's a highway, and there's really nothing else on it but a road. There's very little sidewalk. There's somebody there trying to get around. I don't know what they're making a wheelchair. I don't know what they're doing, but look how narrow the sidewalk is. Very, very narrow. There's no bike lanes. There's no transit lane. There's a shopping center here which has maybe a car wash, or automobile repair. I don't know what's going on here. But this is nothing. This is an auto-oriented, auto-dominated environment. So what can we do to change that? Well, it wouldn't take a lot. It wouldn't take a lot of change to make this place better. First of all, we start by changing the way the road is being used. Add some bike lanes. Add some landscaping. Widen the sidewalk. Improve the signals. Then we want to start thinking about how we're going to improve the real estate development of this property. Instead of having a shopping center with a big parking lot and automobile repair, we should have a mixed-use development here of people living above the shops having creating activity at the street level. And then at the end of all this, you have this. a beautiful mixed-use place with room for pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars, and a mixed-use center. This also is an interesting, this problem also exists actually, as I mentioned earlier, with existing transport stations. Now here's a station that's in, outside of San Francisco. The trains are coming in here, but the station has this giant parking lot here for the people, the commuters. And it's not exactly a place I want to be spending much time. That's what it really is. The shops look a bit tired. It's pretty boring place. But again, some simple changes in the environment and in the urban form can make this into a wonderful mixed-use place. Again, start in stages. Here's the better landscaping, improving the facades of the stores. Then from there we go to the next step, developing that parking lot, putting a residential development on the parking lot with some shops next underneath, and providing some parking for the commuters, perhaps with some underground parking instead. So again, the net result is a lovely, mixed-use, pedestrian-friendly place that people can live, and then use the train station right there to get to where they need to be. And you're seeing this in European cities as well. Zurich is developing these new urban villages when they expand their light rail line. So this development here was built because this was built. So they complement each other. In America, many communities are being innovative in thinking about transport and land use together. This is in Washington, D.C. You can see the Washington Monument over here and the Capitol over there. This is Arlington County, Virginia, across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. But Washington's metro system was built in a way so that all the stations have a land use plan associated with them. And that plan allows for development at a higher density around each station. Therefore, the Transit Authority benefits because they get the increased value of real estate development around the station. The economic vitality is improved, but it also allows for this mixture of uses around the stations. So in this photo, you can actually see where the stations are located. Here's a station here, there's a station there. If you follow this out beyond Washington, you go this direction, you can see the clusters of higher density buildings at each station, which is a mixture of uses. And this would be here, this would be apartments, offices, retail, and all integrated with the station. But it's also important to note that the existing suburban area on the outskirts of the higher density zone are preserved, but there is a gradual change in the density from the higher density by the station to the lower density further away. So those of you who aren't planners in the room, this might be a bit technical, so I won't go into this in too much detail. But this just shows you a little bit about how you go about planning these particular areas. And what we do in planning practice is we do kind of 4 steps. We identify existing conditions, look at opportunity areas for regeneration, create a land use plan, and then recommend where we can make improvements to the station so that it can be more interconnected with the whole area. Now, this is a project that I didn't work on this, but this is an example in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's not so much important where it is. This kind of a concept can be used anywhere, really. It's just to give you an understanding of how this sort of process works. you have the station here. This is a light rail line. You have a study area. And in this case, they wanted to see what kind of opportunities for developing rail transit there would be. So they did an inventory of the land uses. They then looked at where there might be existing new development occurring. Then they looked at where there might be some opportunity areas for new development, where there might be some vacant land or some underutilized land. And then a plan was created. In this case, sort of like that earlier slide I showed you, here's what it looks like before, and here's what it looked like after, when all these land uses are complementing the light rail system, the tram. Now I'll show you a few projects that I've worked on in the U.S. using these principles. Charlotte, North Carolina is on the border of North and South Carolina. It's a city of about 1 million people, metropolitan area. They were very innovative and thinking strategically. They were a growing city, and they were concerned about sprawl development, causing more traffic congestion and more pollution. So they decided to impose, the voters of Charlotte decided to create a special tax that would be used to fund and finance public transport improvements. So they're going to build a whole new series of rail lines. So as a part of that, they looked at the different rail lines and looked at the new stations along the rail line and how development along those stations would be done using the TOD concept. So we did one of the stations, which was down in this area, up here, this one here. And the whole idea was that each station would have a plan and a transport-oriented mixed-use center. So using the same concepts I described, this is about a 500-meter radius distance from here. And we have the higher density development close in, a little lower density further out. The station is here, and we've clustered all the mixture of uses together here. So now when the railroad is being built, the land uses that are being built with the railroad will be complementary. This is in Sydney, Australia. Here's an example of what happens when you don't think about planning, or you don't think of transport and land use, and don't coordinate. If you look at this aerial photograph, you see here's the station, and there's a shopping mall over here, there's a development over there. This parking lot serves the station, but there's no way to get to any of these from here. You have to get in your car and drive to these places. It's not very efficient. You have a station here, but yet it's not connected. There's no connection. And this is a problem in a lot of cities and a lot of communities where you might have two different government agencies not talking to each other. And the result is not thinking together. In this case, the client I was working for owned this building here. And he wanted to rezone that building to allow him to develop that as a residential development. So he could then connect to the station and make the station and the development benefit each other. And this is an example of one and also in Sydney, but the difference on this one is that instead of being a rail activity center, this was based on bus travel. Sydney has a very extensive bus network, and this road here was a major bus route in and out of the city center. So this parcel was here and it was being regenerated. And our plan was to take that parcel and create a bus station so that buses would pull in and drop off and pick up passengers, and then there would be a mixed-use development here, and would provide a complementary land use to the transport route. And in London, we've done this as well. This is the new East London line, called the Overground system. Have any of you been to London? Anyone been to London? Okay. Well, this is this opened about 4 years ago, this line. And what the Transport for London did here to think strategically and thinking about the future. If you look at the station, it's like a concrete box. And the reason it looks like that is because this area here is going to be redeveloped and regenerated in the future. So they designed the station so that it can accommodate the development that's going to occur here. So that way, when this development does occur, the station and the development will be complementary. So there's an example of thinking strategically and thinking about the future and not just thinking without thinking. That's the way I think. That's a term. And this is what it looks like now. So some of these this is a temporary retail center called the Box Park, which is also on the side of the station, again, while waiting for the regeneration to happen. And this is a very successful, this is made out of shipping containers. These are all shipping containers put together, and it's a little retail, like a pop-up retail center. And it's very popular, but it's only temporary. But what's good about it is that it allows some activity to be happening at the station, even though the big development hasn't happened yet. You can't see it from here, but there is under the bridge where the station is. You can see it on this slide. Under here, they've now put football pitches and activity underneath the viaduct here, so that the space is being used and not wasted. And this is another development further up the line, where a station was being built here, and instead of just having the station by itself, the development, the station was designed so it has a concrete cover over it, which allowed for this residential development to be built on top of it, which is Dalston Square. It's called Dalston Square. So the station is actually under here, and the residential development is above. And that's again the transit authority designed the station so that it would accommodate the development. And as I mentioned, Moscow is doing some interesting stuff as well. Some of you may have seen some of the improvements because you live here, as I mentioned earlier. This is a project I worked on about 2 years ago for the station Akademika Yegula, which is about 20 kilometers from here. Anybody familiar with that area? You know it? You know? You live there? Oh, well. Oh, okay. Well, if you're familiar with the area, you know it's not a very attractive place. I'm trying to be nice. I'm a guest here in Moscow, and be nice, but yes, it's not very attractive. But as you may know, the metro is doing a number of these, what they call TPU, which is a number of the stations along the metro are being planned for these kinds of mixed-use developments. And it's a Russian, it's called TPU, I think it's TPU, how do you say it? Yeah. And so I didn't work on this specifically, but there was a lot of analysis that went on, just looking at the existing conditions, where the parking was. You don't have to interpret this, you can read this yourselves. I don't understand this. I know this is sort of, you can read this now, I haven't been interpreted. But this type of analysis was done. There was also this kind of analysis here, looking at how far away people, where the existing services are, where the existing bus routes are located. But as you well know, those of you who are familiar with this area, the problem I saw for somebody who's never doesn't live in this area, was that you have the tram line that ends there, you have the train station over here, and you have the metro there. They're not connected. So the first thing I said, of course I don't have, it's not my money, but I said, get the money and extend this all the way to here, bring it to there. So that way everything's connected, and you have choices. Because right now, one of the problems that I see with the metro is that it's overcrowded. A lot of people use it to go short trips when they could use something else. If you create these connections, you give people a choice. So maybe they don't take the metro, maybe they take the train, maybe they take the tram. Maybe they don't, to get from here to there, they don't, they can just stay here. They don't have to come into Moscow. They can work and live and do everything here. There's all this kind of vacant, unutilized land around. So that's what a TOD, or in this case a TPU, can do. So what we did is we looked at the fact that there's all this dense development here, but not at the station. The station itself is quite, not much going on there. This is how it looks today. Those of you who know it can see this is what it looks like. It's changed slightly. I think this building is now finished. But you can see the problem here. All these buildings are set back far from the stations here, but the buildings are far away. So there's no sense of community. There's no sense of an activity center. When you come out of the station here, you don't feel like you are somewhere. You don't know where you are. Coming out of the station, it's like, oh, this isn't look. I went back down to the station. So that's the challenge. That's the real challenge. So what we did, we looked at, there's some empty parcels here. There's a little bit of stuff over here. There's something over there. How can we create some development opportunities that would connect into the station and create a sense of a place? Unfortunately, the highway agency, whoever they are, I don't know who they are, they decided that they're going to build this bridge over there. Has it done? Is it been built?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, that was quick. I was over there 2 years ago. Wow, that was nice. I thought the bridge was a stupid idea.
Yeah.
Am I on camera? I'll tell you why. Because all this is the problem we have with when we think about cars first and other things second. Building that bridge, probably the thinking was, oh, we need to build a bridge because we're going to speed up traffic. Well, that might speed up traffic a little bit, but then other people are going to have the idea, hey, I got that bridge is there. Wow, it's faster now. I'm going to drive too. So suddenly, more people start driving, and then whatever savings of congestion this bridge might have created will be lost very quickly because others will start driving because there's a bridge and it's faster. Then it won't be fast again, it'll be congested again, and then we'll be back where we were before, which is more congestion. Anyway, we had to assume the bridge was there, and nothing I could do about that. But what we did let me see if that's on the other side. What we did suggest is that what you do under the bridge is really the interesting part. They were just going to put parking lots under there. I said, well, why do you have parking lots there? Who's going to park there? Is it the people who live around here? Is it people visiting to shop there? There's nothing to shop. There's nothing there for them to do. What are we going to do with that parking? So I said, forget the parking. This should be a bus interchange point. So the idea that I had was just create a bus interchange point on both directions. Feeds right into the station because there's existing stairs to the station now. Improve the better bike lanes and bike parking, as well as the bus interchange. And then in the middle here, where the bridge is at its highest point, which is kind of now going to be, it's now just sort of empty space. What are you going to do with that space? Not much. Well, we could do something with it, which we've done in London. Create an enclosed football pitch or a recreation tennis court, a recreation facility that could be in the middle there, and it could become a place where people could actually go and use, instead of having some empty space that's just sitting there, not very well utilized, and kind of empty and dangerous. And so now you have some active use there instead of some inactive use. So that was my suggestion. What can we do? We're going to have this bridge. We might as well make the best of it, but make an intermodal transport hub out of this place. Put the tram in, extend it. So now you have choices. So not only you have the metro, you've got information about how to use the bus, the trolley bus, the tram, the railroad. All these, now you have all these choices. You understand how to get around. You know where to go. It gives you much more mobility, greater mobility than you might have had, or that you didn't know existed, and to provide alternatives to the metro. And then the land uses, which would be created over here and over here, would then allow for more development that complements the land into the transport hub. And you know, that's where when I was there. That's before the bridge. That's 2 years ago now. The bridge is there already?
Yep.
Well, that was fast. But they don't mess around, these bridges, huh? Does it look any better? The bridge? No?
Worse.
Oh, there you go. There's a problem. So again, if you're familiar with this area, I mean, unfortunately I was there during winter, so it wasn't the most attractive. Did it look better in the summer? A little bit? There are trees. Like I was surprised about, I don't have the photo here, but the station for this railroad was like, I couldn't believe it. It was like this little cinder block, small little building, part of us falling down. It looked a bit sad, actually. But again, this is the current transfer facility. It's pretty unpleasant, and you know it wouldn't take a lot to make this much better. Put some better information signs, widen the space here, fix the problem with the drainage there, perhaps. Some landscaping. It wouldn't take a lot to make it much better. Now the other thing, maybe you can answer me this question too, is I haven't been back there in a while. They've just built this park and ride lot, which no one was using. The reason they built the park and ride lot there was because it's above the station, and the structure wasn't strong enough to put a building there. And it's really it was unfortunate because it's a great prime location for a building, a mixed-use building, but because of the station underneath, it wouldn't be able to accommodate a building. It's not structurally sound. So they built this park and ride lot there. But I don't know why. Because who's going to park and ride there? The whole idea of having the metro there is that you wouldn't want to drive. Why would you want to drive to this metro station? I don't get it. I don't know who would do that. But as you can see, no one was using it when I was there. No one was using it. I don't know. Is anyone using it now?
It's under the bridge now.
What's that?
They have the bridge, and the parking is under the bridge.
Oh well. They can see they didn't take my suggestions very well, did they? But again, what I'm trying to show you is, here there are things you look and you say, why is that? How come we're doing these kind of things? Just certain simple solutions can make a huge amount of difference. I mean, like this bus. These are all these buses sitting here waiting to be. It's a bus. Where is it? It's a place where the buses. The drivers wait here to go for the next route. It's like a rest area for the buses. And it's right in front of this beautiful forest park. And I mean, I came by here and said, how do you get to the park? We had to go by through all the buses. There's no sidewalk. I was like, this is really unpleasant. And couldn't we make this a little bit nicer and fix the environment here? The same with, again, mentioning about the tram extension, making that work. You know, developments have to be, when we think about new development in Moscow, we have to think about how they relate to the transport station. Now, you think this is right across the street from the station, but yet it's set back very far. It's got this parking lot right here. This is the corner right by the station. It should be integrated with the station. Instead, it's like the station doesn't even exist. And not only that, it's a sombrero. What's that all about? You have to have Mexican and so you see my point, which is that we have to think about development. We have to think about the integration of transport and land use. And this is an example of when it's not happening. It's so obvious. The station's right there. That you wouldn't know it from looking at this development at all. It's not even thinking about it. So how do we actually? How do we make things happen? How do we change things? Now, again, these concepts may not be necessarily applicable to Moscow, but this is the kind of thing that we think about, certainly in the U.S., about when we're trying to encourage these kinds of concepts, which is making sure that government policies allow for mixed-use development, increasing investment in transport and transit in a strategic way, so that growth is directed to the existing centers and not into new areas that are undeveloped, that are green fields, that where we want to have development that's corridor oriented. We want to promote choices of modes of travel, and we want to make sure that new developments have access to not just cars, but to walking and cycling and all transport modes. And it's about convenience, it's about improving your quality of life, and it's also about, you know, how much you're spending on your daily commute, how much time you're spending, how much time you're spending on petrol, how much your health is being impacted by all the pollution that's going on. So once we can address these things in government, and government is starting to do that in different parts of the U.S. and in Europe and in Britain. But it may seem obvious, but it's not easy. There's still a lot of planners, a lot of politicians, a lot of members of the general public are very happy to be living in a place where they can drive and drive on it. And it's making these changes can be met with resistance many times. And sometimes it's very difficult to make these changes because people just do not want to give up having a car as their main source of travel. I had an example. When I first came to Moscow working on another project, I was interviewing some transport officials, academics. We were talking about the subject, and they said, well, we were talking to people who have cars here in Moscow, and this one woman said, I don't mind sitting in traffic because I'm in my own car. I can put on the music, I can put on the air conditioning or the heat. I'm in my own space, it's very comfortable, and it's better than being in a metro run like this, and it smells a bit funny, and who knows what's going on, and it's noisy. And she said, I don't care about the congestion, it's no problem. I've had to wait, so be it. I'm in my own car, it's my space, it's great. How do we address that kind of behavior? How do we make that kind of person change their behavior? It's very difficult because the car has a very strong appeal to people. It represents freedom to go and do whatever you want. It's your own space, it's your own little bubble, but for your own personal thing. And people feel secure in their car. So it is a big challenge to change people's behavior once they're used to having a car. Again, I'll just show you a couple of examples before we wrap up of what's going on in the UK at the moment. This is a new crossrail project in London. It's the largest construction project in Europe at the moment. And as I mentioned earlier, this is making the whole point of this project is to create mixed-use development opportunities all along the stations. And it's already making an impact in development of affordable new housing projects all along the route. And so the transport for London is looking at another route. This is called Crossrail 2. It's going to go northwest to southeast. And this project is designed to open up new housing development opportunities in certain of these areas to the north. So it's not looked at as I mentioned in my beginning remarks about sustainable transport. It's not about bringing people from point A to point B. It's about developing communities. In this case, although this transport improvement will help mobility, it's also a way to develop land to create more opportunities for housing. And it's an economic development project as much as it is a transport project. So when we think about transportation infrastructure, it's not just an engineering project. It's a urbanism building project. Britain is going to start building high-speed 2, which will connect the existing Eurostar high-speed service to Manchester. A similar thing. Also, it was designed first as just a railroad to speed up the travel times. Well, now it's looked upon as a way to promote growth in these older cities of Birmingham and Manchester. And so each of those cities will have a mixed-use development scheme around their stations to improve economic growth. So, to conclude, what we have to do is we have to find a way to reverse this legacy of car dominance in our cities. It doesn't matter what city it is, it's a global problem. It could be here in Russia, it's America, it's in Europe, certainly what you're seeing even in places like China. When I first went to China in 1996, the majority of people were still cycling. I was so impressed, all these people cycling. I went back 10 years later, they're on the bikes now. They're not there. Everyone's driving. And it's massive traffic jams. It's all the time. The pollution is terrible. The air quality is awful. What happened? People got more money. The car became a status symbol. And so more people got cycling was considered, well, that's for poor people. That's the old. And it's a shame because they had a real cycling infrastructure here. It's all pretty much gone. So we have to start reversing that. And in Britain, for example, there's lots of examples where even train stations were made difficult to get to because they were on the ring roads. So in Britain, we're starting to see we're renovating these places to bring back the old pedestrian routes and to make them less car dependent. So something we can maybe discuss afterwards is that what are the future trends affecting transport methods? Well, some of these things you see all the time. First in traffic, petrol prices are changing. Right now they're low, but they've been high. Are we running out of oil? Well, what are our alternatives here? We have to think about. We can't depend on. We can't use cars and hope that the oil won't be there. How's that going to affect transport methods? The cost of running the cars going up. People are getting older. The population is getting older. The aging population. People living longer. What is that going to mean to those who live in places where having a car is the only way to get around? How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to make those people more mobile, more accessible to different modes of travel? And last but not certainly not least is that we have obesity epidemic all around the developed world. And it's because many people have started and don't walk anymore. They drive everywhere. I'll give you an example of my niece has two boys who are school age. They live outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in a very suburban area. Single-family homes, everyone drives, there's no public transport anywhere. Everything's very far. So I was there visiting them, and they said, we're going to take the kids for a bike ride. So great, let's go on the bike. So we're going to go. Well, I said, well, no, we can't do that. I said, why not? Well, we can't bike from where our house is because the roads are too dangerous. There was no sidewalk, there was no shoulder. And so we took the bikes, put them on the car, and drove to a park so they could ride their bike. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem to make much sense, does it? So here we have this community they live in where they have to drive their car and go ride their bike. So that defeats the whole idea of having a bike. So that's the danger when we have that kind of extreme levels of development where people have to, they have no choice. No choices. My oldest nephew just got his driver's license. And he drives everywhere because he has no choice. Yes, he has to drive. There's no other option for him. So as I said, in conclusion, I would just say that these kinds of steps that we can help affect some of these changes that are happening in the future is facilitating mixed-use urban development, increasing investment in transit, promoting mobility choices, and making sure that we have more walking and cycling opportunities. So, I just will leave you with this. Is this the future or the past? And this is Beijing, actually, without the bicycles. So, are we going to continue to develop like this, or are we going to develop in a more sustainable way? And I hope that you heard a little bit today about some of what's going on in other places and how we can take steps to do that. You're fortunate here in Moscow in that you're in a city that's got an excellent transport system. But as you can see by that example I gave you, there's a lot of disconnect still between land use and transport that could be improved a lot. And certainly in terms of making Moscow more pedestrian friendly, there's a lot more that's been done as well. But it's not just here. It's happening in London, it's happening in Philadelphia, all around the U.S. So this is not just unique to here, it's a problem. So with that, I'll just stop and I'll take some questions. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Спасибо большое, мистер Равелли. У меня, прежде чем перейти к вопросам, есть два небольших объявления. Первое, это то, что мы практикуем сейчас такую небольшую форму краудфандинга на сбор средств на работу нашего фонда, и у нас сегодня будет после этой лекции ужин с мистером Равелли, поэтому если кто-то хочет присоединиться, у нас есть платный билет. И подходите после лекции, если кто-то заинтересуется, вот ко мне, мои коллеги. Это раз. И два, это то, что у нас в традиции есть замечательная книга проектирования городских улиц. Есть такая организация, Международный союз общественного транспорта, правильно так называется, да? Ну, в общем, перевели мы эту замечательную книгу проектирование городских улиц, вот ровно о том, о чем говорил сегодня мистер Равелли. В этой книге все рассказано и показано, как в том числе и правильное транспортное планирование на городских улицах совершается. И, собственно, эта книга достанется тому, кто задаст лучший вопрос. Лучший вопрос, по мнению нашего спикера сегодняшнего. И все, я прошу, если у кого-то есть вопросы, то их задавать. И да, вопрос задавать по-русски.
Добрый день. Большое спасибо за вашу лекцию. И очень отрадно видеть, что иностранный эксперт по-прежнему посещает Москву и что в ней даже делает, для того, что ее посещает. И мой вопрос в продолжении того, о чем вы говорили, может быть, даже в том смысле коллега-коллеги, потому что я молодой консультант, я тоже занимаюсь в том числе транспортными государственными делами в ряде мест в Москве. И вопрос заключается в следующем. Вот мне приводили пример узла улицы Академика Янгеля, и из всех тех предложений, которые вы быстро достаточно представили, так получилось, что в итоге в силу этого многообразия вещей был построен мост. И все. На этом все закончилось. И таких историй в городе происходит какое-то огромное количество, при том, что есть очень большая активность на тему того, что есть понимание проблемы, что есть проблема территорий, прилегающих к станции метро, что таких проблемных мест очень много, что с ними надо что-то делать, и это что-то делать заключается именно в том, о чем вы говорите, то есть это многофункциональный девелопмент, это улучшение городской среды и это улучшение общественного транспорта и так далее. И в связи с этим мой вопрос вам достаточно простой. На ваш взгляд, почему, несмотря на то, что огромное количество проектов делается, направленных на то, чтобы улучшить ситуацию, почему на выходе получается то, что получается? Почему на выходе, почему из того проекта, из того отчета в 70, 80, 100 страниц, которые вы, скорее всего, сдали в рамках своей работы, почему из всего этого огромного массива информации на выходе получился лишь не очень желанный мост? Спасибо. Напишем эти процедуры.
Well, that is a question that's I don't really have a good answer for it. A lot of times things like this happen because there is a political desire to make it happen, or because there's not been the community involvement to get the users what they want. But having said that, I'm sure the people who live around there really didn't have no opinion about the future, didn't know that. In many cases, it's about educating people to know what is good, what's good, and what's good. And someone knows that, oh, it's a great idea, I'm sure it makes sense. Maybe if you had people like you, those of you in the truth agreement in this sort of thing, if you were to educate those who like that, say, hey, what about this idea? You can use concepts about that. Would you like to have this? Would you like to have that? Because most of the time, you give people a choice whether you want this or that. Is it, oh, I want that. Well, I showed you the ideas I had. You said, oh, of course, that's great. But in this situation, I don't know what's happening. So I work for a mayor. I work for the mayor of Philadelphia, great mayor, so I understand politics very well. How to be something like an issue, more things that happen that you may not think is important, but they okay. But we do have a mentality in highway departments, which is that it's about changing people's thinking, and that does take some time. And maybe the next time, if you can start educating the population about these concepts, consultation but this kind of thing happened in Europe too. I've seen it happen even just a few years ago. We were looking at the observers center in Philadelphia, and they thought, what? This is the 21st century. What happened? Oh, yeah, not about that. These are highways engineers. Well, we had to tell them. We had to make them do that too. Sorry, no, take that. So I was working there. I said, no, that's not something we have to go back and do right. But they were trained in a different way. It was just far away.
Thanks.
Пожалуйста, еще вопросы?
Спасибо за интересную лекцию. У меня вот такой вопрос. Скажите, а как вы видите преобразование городов, как сейчас вот в Америке, если большой город разреженный, где люди живут в индивидуальных домах? И вполне возможно, что такое преобразование потребует изменения вообще жилья людей. Как вот можно было бы людям объяснить или легко вообще как бы продвинуть вот эту идею в таком случае? Спасибо.
Well, but it's a very interesting bring it up because there's an organization I belong to in the U.S. It's also a national organization that has a chapter in Moscow. It's called the Urban Land Institute. And July has just been publishing a whole series of reports on density and why density is good, higher density is good, and benefits of higher density. And they are taking this whole initiative that they are doing and taking the cities into politicians into real estate developers to help them understand why higher density is a good thing for the community. Because there's a lot of resistance to it. Even in London, where as big as London is, it's about 8 million people and growing rapidly. London is a very low density city. Not a lot of high-rise residential high-rise like you have in Moscow. And there's a lot of resistance to that because people live in a low density environment. You can't tear down your homes to build a high-rise, but there are a lot of lands that are undeveloped or maybe industrial land that could be regenerated where a higher density development could happen. And there's resistance to that. People don't want high-rise. But in fact, in London, the city government has decided that that is going to be their policy, which is higher density. So all the development has to, because the need of the people and the cost of housing is so high, there's no choice but to build at a higher density. So the cost is just too high. In America, it depends on where you live. Some places like Atlanta, which you mentioned, are so, the land use patterns are so low and they go out so far that it's very hard to change that in a short period of time. However, what we are seeing in America, and even in Britain as well, is a lot of young people, like perhaps we have this room, very old at the moment. Well, I think I had a statistic here actually. That there is a the percentage of 17 to 20-year-olds with a driving license in Britain is small. And this is also happening in America. That the number of young people getting a driver's license only declining. It's already declining. And many of them are moving into the cities. They want to live in a dense environment. They like being around people. They like that interaction. They like being having all the restaurants and clubs where they can walk and push their friends. And whether it's because of social media, I don't know, but it's an empty phenomenon that's happening in all the major cities in the U.S. Philadelphia is the population of cities is increasing because of maybe a lot of young people who want to move into the city because they want to live in that more dense environment. They don't like suburban. So maybe we're seeing a generational change that model of living is no longer interesting to people, and we're seeing a trend back to living in the city. But I would recommend for your purposes getting this book on density from the ULI. It's online, it's downloaded, and there's a ULI chapter here in Moscow.
Two questions. First, how we consider вопрос. Как вы относитесь к высокоплотным зданиям в Москве? Пригород, аутскит. Не кажется ли вам, что Москва и так слишком большая, и дальше не стоит? Даже плотные. Второй вопрос. Изучали ли вы советское транзит-ориентед девелопмент?
Well, I'm not very familiar with the Soviet experience. I only know what I've seen when I've been here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, it was seen kind of
can we consider high density urban sprawl in Moscow outskirts?
Oh, yes. Actually, this question came up a couple of years ago. My first trip to Moscow, I brought up here looking while as a panel of experts by the mayor, sitting on to look at Moscow and its development. And what we concluded is that actually Moscow has a lot of underutilized land. So within the MCAT, that doesn't require Moscow to expand that beyond where it currently is. And that there's a lot of underutilized industrial land that has great potential for redevelopment, regeneration, at a higher density, and with the mixed use concepts as I've described here. For example, the big Moscovich factory, huge area of industrial area. I understand that's being regenerated as a plan. But there's lots of other places like that in Moscow. You may be familiar with the new the small railway train that's going to be reopened. And when that reopens, there are all these development opportunities around that railway train that were former industrial plants that are just sitting there unutilized. And they could be prime locations for activity centers for public transport. That's very close in the city. So Moscow has a lot of land that's not being developed, and that's the challenge, is to get that land developed properly and sustainably, so we don't have to go beyond and build far out at the edges of the city.
Еще вопрос?
Добрый вечер, меня зовут Артем. Спасибо большое за вашу интересную лекцию. У меня такой вопрос. Понятно, что можно очень много сделать для увеличения привлекательности общественного транспорта, но как, на ваш взгляд, должен ли автомобиль в итоге стать роскошью, или все-таки можно достичь уменьшения использования автомобилей неэкономическими мерами, так как ограничения по номерам и так далее?
Well, I mean, there's not a whole lecture I just did it this afternoon at the higher school of economics. It's an area of planning called travel demand management, which is how we influence travel behavior, how we create incentives for people not to drive. It doesn't mean that not to have a car, it provides incentives for people not to drive. I'm not anti-car, but we have to understand that there's only so much space for cars to be. There's only so much room for cars in the urban environment. I mean, Moscow has, because of its development historically, there's not that many, if you look at the percentage of land use that's devoted to roads in Moscow, it's less than it is in any city in Europe and North America, which means Moscow has fewer streets, physical streets, for cars to travel on. So it's just the fact that there just isn't enough room. Everybody, if we live in a perfect world, I would like to have a car, but we can't because just physically there's not enough space on the streets for everyone to have a car. So we have to manage all of this transport infrastructure in a way that gives everybody who needs to use it a piece of it. But we have to understand that not everybody can have a car, which is impossible. And some of us like here are certainly being not happy with that. That's fine. If there are others who feel I want to have a car, I can have it, I'm not going to give it up. And we have to be understanding of that. And that's true of every city in the world. Every city's grappling with this topic of cars. But I would say that there are ways we can do that. Maybe I could take another hour talking about travel and management, but just to leave you with this thought that if we have to manage the transport asset that we have, whether it's in Moscow or Philadelphia or New York, the same thing. The cost of expanding our transport network, whether it's highways, metros, buses, is very expensive. And government doesn't have a lot of money to spend, no matter whether it's here or anywhere. allow people to move around because now they have options for people to get. So make things convenient, make it cost competitive with the cost of buying a car that people will naturally make that change. But there's always going to have people, there will always be people who will drive and won't pick up their car for whatever reason. But that's just the facts. That's the facts of life. And there's always going to be a little congestion no matter what we do. But we have to, there are ways that we can make the car less the dominant. Does that answer your question? Maybe not.
Часть моего вопроса была о том, насколько эффективны неэкономические меры. Но потом я понял, что все меры в конечном итоге экономические.
Oh, well, yeah, well, I should say that, no, they are, meaning changing behavior.
Ограничения по номерам, license plate, restrictions, even all kinds of things.
Oh, I'm not familiar personally about how that system has worked, and I know actually Beijing has been trying that, and I know other cities have tried that. I think there's always a danger with people not being honest, and I've seen straight people have 2 license plates, and they switch them, so they can use them any day. So, there's always going to be that problem. I mean, I think it's a good idea. It's certainly an idea that makes sense. It's just I don't have any data on how economically how it's been impacting the economy. I just know that from what I understand, I know none of these programs has caused any economic harm, from what I understand.
В дополнение к этому вопросу, эффективно ли снижение пропускной способности улиц? Полезно ли это, хорошо?
Yes. Again, I have another presentation that I was talking about that earlier today at the university. There's this whole concept of it's becoming more and more the norm in transport planning of what's called complete streets. In English, it's called complete streets. And what it means is you look at each street as if it has to accommodate all modes of travel. So in the past, we think the street is just cars. The garden area, it's cars, all cars, that's it. But we now look at streets as being, it's from building edge to building edge. That entire space has a use. And how do we accommodate all the modes of travel in that space? And if you think about each street, categorize it as an important street, is it just a smaller street? So you're right, it's a very big issue. And this idea of looking at the street as a multimodal thing, so that it has to accommodate not just cars, but bicycles, pedestrians, buses, and even emergency vehicles, whatever. So the street is a whole physical space that has to be managed.
Еще вопрос?
Здравствуйте. Вы говорите о городе Шерлок в Каролине и говорите о том, что жители города решили ввести налог, чтобы улучшить транспортную инфраструктуру города, ущерб автомобилю, развивая общественный транспорт. Вопрос такой. В Москве невозможно представить, чтобы люди проголосовали за новый налог. Поэтому насколько эффективна деятельность государства по улучшению городской среды, если она не опирается на мнение и чаяния жителей? Спасибо. Извините, я постараюсь пояснить. Например, когда речь идет о строительстве новых ГБУ, нас не проходит публичных слушаний, не проходит публичного обсуждения. Жители получают проект в виде Cowboy Stadium in Arlington, shining, блестящий такой ХБУ, в котором вы получите торговый центр и так далее, да, вот все вот экрана. И жители не могут влиять на эти решения. Насколько эффективно административное навязывание таких решений, когда не жители голосуют за вот эти решения, а когда это навязывается сверху администрации.
Yes, well, that is a problem. And, I mean, that is in Charlotte, as I said. Well, there was a group of business people and politicians who decided that the transport network in Charlotte needed to be improved, and they saw what happened in Atlanta, where the sprawl was so great that you have 24-hour traffic jams, and it's very unpleasant. And they said, we want to make our city better than that. And it was a very progressive thing to do. There's very few cities in America that have done that. But they had a campaign. Once they decided to put this to the voters, there was a campaign to disseminate information to the voting public about what the benefit of this tax would be, how it would be used. They showed the specific projects of where this tax would be used, so that the voters were not just voting for some new tax, but not knowing how it was going to be spent. I think that's very important. In this case, in Charlotte, they had a plan that said if you approve this tax, there wasn't a lot, it was a 0.5% sales tax. It was very, very small. Here's what you're going to get. Here's the plan. You're going to get all these new rail lines, improved bus services, so that voters can see a real result of that money. It's not like the money was being raised and no one knew how it was going to be used. And that's the real key. You can't just have a tax and just not know how it's going to be spent. We all don't believe our politicians and our lawyers they're going to spend our tax dollars very wisely. They just take the money. So in this case, the money, there's an actual plan. Everyone knew what the plan said, and the money was going to be used to implement that plan. And that's what you saw with the drawings. The rail lines are being built as we speak. In London, the congestion charge is another example, a very unpopular thing. But the mayor at the time, in 2000, said, I think this is a good idea, I'm going to do it. He got the support to do it, and there was resistance to it. But he said all the money that's raised from this charter is going to be used for transit only. It wasn't going to the general fund of the city. It was to be used for transit only. And that argument was not persuading people that it was a good idea. And in fact, the congestion charge contributes 40 million pounds a year to transport to London, which is a huge amount of money that they can spend on transport.
Добрый вечер. Спасибо за интересную лекцию. И вопрос такой, точнее два вопроса. Вот чего вам удалось достичь в Филадельфии, в то время как вы отвечали там за транспортную политику? И есть ли что-то, чего удалось достичь тогда, что применимо сегодня в Москве?
That's actually kind of hard. It's a lot of what I did was small projects. They were large, big projects. We didn't really have any way to do big projects. I think, one thing that I think would be helpful in just in terms of quality of life, we have a program of public art in transit, and we created a whole series of bus shelters in the city center that were designed by an artist, so that the shelters were works of art. And so it was nice to not have to think, bus shelters are very plain. They do what, and then they're designed to do what they do, which is provide a shelter. Maybe they're fairly ordinary. So we designed the shelf to be unusual, but attractive. And I think people appreciated the fact that we were creating some public art, something that made the public space more enjoyable. And they've been built and they're fun and people like them. So I think that's the kind of thing you can probably do in Moscow. It's not an expensive thing, but it's getting some creativity into the public spaces. I mean, if you think about, Moscow has a lot of art and a lot of stuff. It's a very historical city. There's a lot of artwork, statues, and monuments, etc. And certainly the metro, the historical part of the metro was built with lots of decoration, etc. But modern stations tend to be very kind of ordinary in that regard. So bringing public art into the transport area, I think, is a good thing.
Еще созрел вопрос. Давайте, последний.
Вопрос про ТПУ. Должны ли они быть компактными, удобными для пешеходов? Или же они могут напоминать аэропорт гигантскими размерами, в которых пассажирам нужно идти длинное расстояние, на ваш взгляд?
Definitely compact. I mean, the whole point of these projects I mentioned is that in a 500-meter radius is the most talking about, and even that is a fairly long distance. So it's got to be very compact. Compact is the key.
Ну что ж, спасибо большое.
Thank you very much.
И
Спасибо.
последнее к вам задание — это выбрать лучший вопрос, за который мы подарим.
I feel very a lot of pressure now because if I don't say the right thing, people will get not happy with me. They will chase me out of town. I would be forced to leave Moscow quickly. Well, I had the fellow there, who's right there. Yes, I thought your question was very good. No, you, yes. I thought your question was very good.
Собственно, к концу сегодняшней лекции стало прям уж совсем как-то так душновато, как в вагоне метро, что еще раз нам напоминает о том, какую большую роль в нашей жизни играет общественный транспорт, который нужно развивать. Собственно, спасибо всем, что пришли. Спасибо компании Spotlight, которая помогает нам эту лекторию организовывать. Спасибо мистеру Равелли, разумеется. И следующая наша лекция будет состоиться 15 числа в чуть более просторном помещении в Муаре, на Воздвиженке. И там будет Ракен Гагаров, это арт-директор студии Артемия Лебедева. Он будет рассказывать про городской дизайн. Собственно, 15-го это вторник, в 7:30, собственно, ждем вас. Спасибо большое.
I would just like to say a thank you to the interpreters. Let's give them applause. I know how difficult that can be for you, so thank you. Hope I was okay. Thanks.
А может,